السلام عليكم.
Hi.
Hi Gareth.
Hi Mohamad. How are you doing?
Great. يعطيكم العافية جميعا. Thank you so much for attending. I hope that this talk will be inspiring and beneficial for you all. But Gareth will start, maybe.
Hi everyone. Thanks very much for inviting me. Wonderful to be here. So I'm going to give you a short presentation on me and my work. So I'm a trained cabinet maker originally, so my natural home is a workshop. But I'm known for making one-off sort of fine art pieces of furniture. Some of the examples you see here, mainly in wood, but most recently I've started 3D printing things in sand. But these artworks have afforded me opportunities to do more inspirational, more research-based projects. And the one I wanted to talk to you about today, or I'm going to give you an insight into, is one called In Pursuit of Carbon Negative. So this is a typical manufacturing system that we have in the UK, where wood and forestry is logged and then taken around the world from one place to another, eventually arriving at the end user. This project looked at that system and tried to think of a way that we could rethink how we make things and how we emit carbon within that process. So from my workshop in London, I cycled 146 miles to a woodland in Herefordshire, where I lived off the landscape, eating locally foraged food, and eventually arriving in Hereford. For 3 days, I made furniture out of the woodland and slept in the wood, trying to not use any carbon. So I'd removed milk, dairy, meat, everything from my diet, and I proceeded to try and make these objects in the woodland. The only bit of power that we used was a chainsaw to cut the tree down originally, but everything was split by axe, done on a draw horse with a draw knife, turned on a pole lathe, to finally create the 4 stools or 4 benches and a table and some candlesticks. We then got on our bikes. We cycled all the way back with 60 kilos of furniture on a trolley, all the way back to London, trying to carry on living off the landscape, back to the retailer, which was a company in the East End of London called SCP, who retail and sold the pieces of furniture. So that's one little example of kind of how how my artwork has given me opportunities to look at the life cycle of objects and our carbon consumption, but how perhaps we can rethink the industry and how at every point of the way we can actually reconsider how the normal system can work to reduce our carbon footprint. I've got one other little project, if I've got time to skip through it quickly. Mohamad, are we
Yes.
all right?
Yeah, you can go.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got 2 more minutes. So this is a project that was based in Scotland. In fact, on the islands of Orkney, right off the coast there, the top of the UK. And they have a traditional chair called the Orkney Chair that's made of straw. Now, these islands don't, in fact, have any trees on them, so they have to use the resources they have around them. So they use driftwood from shipwrecks or stuff that washes up onto the beach to make the frames of the chair. So they use the local resources they have around them, which is the straw and driftwood, to make this very traditional chair. So it's a great example of modern design because it uses the vernacular of the landscape in relation to the actual object. Now, this is Kevin, the very last, or one of the very last furniture makers up in Orkney. and I went up and worked with him to design and make a chair for a company to sell globally from London. The chair itself was just a hybrid of the Orkney chair and a southern aesthetic of a Windsor chair. And we stitched the straw, we wove, it took 5 days to do the straw work, and there's the final product that's now evolved, and there's a whole range of this work that we now sell. Yeah, that's the end of my little presentation for you. So let me just get off the screen share and come back to you.
Sure. Great, thank you, Gareth. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about myself and the practice that I do. ما أعرف we can have the my name is Mohamad Alfaraj. أنا من الأحساء السعودية. I grew up there and I'm still based there. I studied at KFUBM, mechanical engineering major, but I ended up being a filmmaker and a visual artist. But that's something that didn't happen like مثلا after I studied and I decided like, oh, I'm not going to do mechanical engineering, I'm going to do this. But honestly, it's something that ما أعرف في الحسد surround you all the time, that you are connected to the outdoors and connected to nature in general. It started like this, a passion from childhood, and then in the university time it became more vivid and more decisive to be a full-time filmmaker and a freelance photographer too. Beside working as a filmmaker and making short documentaries, because also filmmaking is a little bit of a slow process, I decided to explore more of the passions that I also grew up around, which is working with natural materials. Our grandfathers and grandmothers, our ancestors in this country, especially in Al-Hassa, but also in different cities, really worked and embedded the idea of being part of nature in a very natural way. They didn't follow a certain trend, or they didn't think that the world will have a global warming crisis in the next 30 years, but really it was embedded in their nature and their existence in a way. So I thought about looking into that and really just being part of the context, the cultural, the artistic, and the geographical context that I am in, and working towards something that have a long history, have a long kind of history, basically. But also in the work that I do, I try to travel around Saudi Arabia and seek sources of inspiration in different cities, in different regions. I work in making exhibitions and installations. This is part of an exhibition that I presented at Athar Gallery in Jeddah. These are just pictures from, again, around Saudi Arabia, just looking for stories and looking for different ways to tell these stories. You can tell them through film and photography, but also there is a vast kind of ways to tell these stories. And also, again, maybe it's early to talk about this, but a huge part of what I do is kind of honoring and respecting our ancestors, grandfathers and grandmothers, and the men and women that really reserved the heritage and the teachings that they accumulated through time. And now we are in a cultural revolution in the country, and we see that we are more proud of our heritage than any time before. But all of this really didn't happen if weren't of those women and men in this country who really reserved this heritage. So in the work that I do, it's not just taking inspiration from them, but as a filmmaker, I try to always document their work, document their impact too. ما أعرف إذا في وقت. Yeah, we'll go through this بعد in another time. But I think maybe Gareth can tell us more about also the title of our talk, which is Make Locally and Speak Globally. So Gareth, can you speak a little bit about how your practice goes from, like you said, going in the countryside and making these objects into speaking to us here in Saudi Arabia, into speaking globally?
Well, I think it was my thought around this project when I cycled all the way to Hereford that that I was going to be creating carbon-free objects with a really low carbon footprint. But actually, the project became much more about actually the lecture and the discussion that it created around it. So, in a way, the products weren't the successful outcome. It was the learning experience of the journey, how you reflect on the landscape through slowing down, taking time to look at things from a different perspective, but then having the opportunity to be able to tell other people about this journey and how, for example, a horse will manure and replenish your landscape. It will damage less of the natural growth in a woodland, and generally the impact is so much kinder on the environment. And the talk and the experience of this journey is provided a story to tell, and the story has been probably the most successful element of the whole project, really. And for you, where do you see the greatest elements of this coming in through your work?
Yeah, for me, it's really the idea of aesthetics. The idea, because what I do is a little bit different than where you are in terms of practicality. The work that Gareth does, there is like an end result at it. There is a practical result to it. But now I'm just in a process where I'm exploring this practice, and it's about how it looks. It's about really the visual that it leaves, the visual impact that it leaves. And that brings me to the question of the aesthetic. What kind of aesthetic that I use? What is beautiful for us? And really the idea of using a local aesthetic, using a local beautiful element to share it with the world and say that I don't have to use an aesthetic that's coming from a different kind of culture. That's okay, but the thing is, if I want to contribute to the world kind of creativity and design, it's better to use something that I feel close to and I'm part of a bigger context in a way. So
it's sort of the idea of not having to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly.
In a sense, it's on our doorsteps.
That's true.
And constantly, I think we try and look forward. We're constantly trying to push the boundaries of what the future is, whereas actually just to look back at the history of our cultures and how we did things in the past, we can learn so much more.
Absolutely.
And though I might present them in physical form, you present them so beautifully through an emotional dialogue and a sensitivity which is really, really rewarding and really, really fulfilling when you experience those imagery or that imagery.
Yeah, absolutely. فمثلا Maybe we can also speak a little bit about. Now we saw the practice that you do, and also the way and the journey that you go through it until you reach like the final product, like going through the countryside and spending these days trying to finish the product with as much less carbon exposure as you can. But where do you see this practice going? What kind of dreams Gareth Neal has?
At the time, I had dreams that we'd be sailing kind of work around the world on big boats with, you know, giant, great sails and trying to deliver the products, you know, carbon efficiently. Mm-hmm. But I think, you know, in a way, this project was perhaps now 8 years ago. And in the UK, we have lots and lots of furniture companies that are now cropping up. And in a way, this was a seed of something quite a while ago. And there's a lot of companies now in London that are just using locally resourced timber and large companies. And I think it goes throughout the whole kind of dialogue of not only design, but also food and the resourcing of what we eat and what we live around. And this is this, in a way, the dream is panning out in front of me, in a sense, or the vision that I had is actually happening. You know, people are delivering bread on bicycles, people Deliveroo, and the delivery of food on the back of a bicycle across London is all really good examples of where it's becoming more and more of the normal in our environments. And I sense that that's just a wonderful thing. And if there's at any point we can look in detail in our lives or our industries or our businesses where the smallest of savings in relation to energy is really, really beneficial for the world and also for our own well-being, I believe. And I think that's something you reflect on really well within your work, because when I witness what you do, it gives me that same feeling that I'm trying to capture in an object, where there's that us being reminded of what we do and where we're from, and working closely with people and respecting people for who they are, what they do and what they believe in, and working closely with them and not taking advantage of that situation. And I think the straw chair in Orkney is a very sensitive design and sensitive body of people working with the straw, and you know, they were very, very nervous of me touching on their sacred Orkney chair, and it had to be done very, very carefully.
Absolutely.
And if people just think that design is about, or art, or all of these cultural aspects is about just grabbing hold of something and you doing your thing with it, I don't see it like that. I see the importance of holding hands and working together in relation to bringing the best out of what everybody has and what everybody does. And Joe and Paul, they run this woodland. They produce charcoal in the woodland. He's known as a hedgerow worker, in fact, which is an incredible specialist trade in the UK. And he's just trying to make a livelihood out of his woodland. And I wanted to help him make more money and promote what he does. And, you know, so everybody wins in a way.
Yeah. I mean, مثلا, for me, really getting inspired by the place and by the fact that I grew up very close to my grandfather Abdullah, and he used to be a farmer, but also a palm weaver. Like really spend just a whole day weaving this long stripe of palm leaves.
Beautiful process, yeah.
And then also learning and befriending the farmers that I'm around now, and also the women crafts that they do in the markets, and documenting them and listening to their stories, and have their names and pictures documented, and their work is there, because really it's embedded in the work that we do. If you are taking something that a local craft and turning it into something else, it has to be really part of the practice is to respect the people that they actually do it, because with that context, your work matter. If it's not in that context, if it's not respectful and honoring and have that pride in it, I don't think it really matters. You know, it has to be part of a long historical kind of context. I want to show some images. Can we have the images on screen? Sorry. Because I wanted to show you also that how I'm trying to take something traditional and interpret it in my own way, but also maintain respect and play with it. Be really playful and kind of childlike approach to it. Well, that's my grandfather Abdullah and his brother Nasser, who spent almost 95 years until they died working in the land as something, as a lifestyle, as a livelihood, but also something that they really enjoyed. When we accompany them, it's like a magical story, with laughter, with exploration, with food, with building houses and building little things. And also I want to show you these are some of the works that I do, some of the installations, work with photography. But I want to show you something with the palm tree. Yeah, مثلا هذا الشيء, this is one of the things that I do with the palm tree parts, and you see some traditional practices and shapes with it, but this is trying to take it to a level where I can speak about it globally and put the people that I know and the people that I learned from and the place on the world cultural and artistic map in a way that this aesthetic can be beautiful. It is beautiful and has to be recognized as beautiful and has to be part of the whole humanitarian kind of culture accumulation that I'm trying to be part of, and I think Gareth is also part of. Yeah.
I think there's an element, isn't there, of certainly within my side of the industry, of redefining luxury in a sense as well, because you know some people might see this as a waste product, as something you sweep away and you push away as you tidy up your gardens or your yards, and yet there's such beauty to it, there's such value to it, there's a currency to these materials. Absolutely. And used sensitively and beautifully, they are luxurious in a way that perhaps we've forgotten about a decade or 2 decades ago, where everything modern was precious, whereas actually we now understand that the landscape and the materials we have around us are the most precious commodity.
Absolutely. And these installations and shapes that I do are actually palm tree waste. They get thrown away and they get burned at the end. But also it could be some kind of a building unit, like a unit that you can build on beautifully, abstractly, and also architecture kind of way. But this is something our ancestors found out مثلا من زمان, before even working with natural elements could be something trendy, or it was very natural to them مرة, and it made sense يعني to be in that way. Yeah, go ahead.
That intuitive nature of making, and you know, when we were just, it wasn't about greed, it was about need, and what, you know, what the world required, and working within our own, just taking from the landscape what we required. And there's just such a beauty to that, and yeah, we must make sure we try and preserve it, you know, as best we can. I think it's just it's a critical time.
Absolutely. كنت بقول what I'm also trying to do or take this project to now is really one of the things that I'm finding important, which is to, like this platform, like Tanween, to share it, to talk about it, to try and influence and inspire people, but also write about it and document the process, and because otherwise it will get lost, or maybe it will go away and it becomes very personal and it doesn't really benefit other people. But also sharing it, writing about it, documenting it, and be very modest in the way that it can inspire some people, and people can go and do something similar with it or totally different, and that's absolutely fine. That's actually the purpose, the goal is to really instead of spreading a pandemic of an evilish virus, I wish that we have a pandemic soon of working with nature, and we cannot really exist unless we hug a tree or breath.
I had a company in China made a sort of a version of my straw chair in China, and for me that was almost the greatest success.
Absolutely.
I thought, you know, this is not something that I need to keep to myself. No. This is about sharing, and the more people that embrace it, and if it becomes common currency in our home and in our environments. I mean, there's in Japan now, people are bathing in woodlands, and it's reducing heart rates, it's reducing stress levels, it's fighting illnesses. So, and I feel like whatever your natural environment is, you know, you've got to reconnect with it, to recalibrate, to rebalance as people.
Absolutely. And also, it doesn't take out that it's modern, that it's contemporary, that it speaks and relates to the now, that it can express is really something about now. What I'm saying, that doesn't mean that doing art and design, that it's highly advanced and highly technological, that it's wrong. No, it's quite the opposite. It's perfect. But the idea is that there is a lot of, especially new creatives, that they shy away from traditional practices and traditional ways because they think it's out of touch or not related to the now. But from different places in the world, it can be something contemporary and beautiful and practical and speaks about the now too. I think that too.
Yeah, for 10 years within my own practice, I was trying to define what was modern. And then the pieces that got me most noticed were the pieces that talked of traditional furniture making and traditional visuals of English furniture. And the irony was that though they were taught, they were kind of celebrated because they used digital technology. The reality is that actually made them by hand, and it had a digital aesthetic. So, you know, I in a way, I constantly need to refer back in time as much as I think it's important to look forward as well.
Yeah. Amazing. I think we reached the time limit of our session, but was really great to talk to you, Gareth, and
you, Mohamad. It's been fantastic.
Marra, and I hope that the audience here and also the audience there, wherever there is, enjoyed the talk and maybe get even a little bit inspired would be amazing.
Thank you, Mohamad, and thank you, Gareth. You can stay with us on stage for a bit. We'll take 2 minutes for questions. If we have any questions from the audience, please raise your hand. If not, we'll take a virtual question from the screen if we have something with control. Okay, so here it says, I think there's the beginning is not showing on the screen. So briefly it says, in the past few years, the word natural is becoming cool. Do you welcome it, or do you feel like it's another capitalism experience?
Gareth?
I think it's a really good question, and obviously brands are jumping on the bandwagon of using craft or locality as a method to sell more produce. And I think it's really, really important that the consumer is mindful of when these words natural are being used and whether they are genuine in what they say they are. And I think we just got to be very, very careful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Mohamad Alfaraj, for this inspiring talk. I think now we have the next talk with our colleague Hissa, with Hakeem Juma. Thank you very much.
يعطيكم العافية.